When my son Travis got married, I kept my mouth shut about the fact that I had just inherited a $45 million ranch from my late wife. It was the hardest secret I ever had to keep, but thank God I stayed silent. Because exactly 1 week later, my new daughter-in-law showed up at my doorstep with a notary and a document that would have stripped me of everything. She thought she was signing away the rights to a worthless shack and a confused old man. She did not know she was signing her own financial death warrant. But before we get to that moment of justice, you need to see where it all began. It began with a tie. A simple red silk tie, and a wedding where I was treated worse than a stray dog. My name is Harlan Ford. I am 70 years old. I have calluses on my hands that are older than my son, and I have spent my life believing that family is the only thing worth dying for. But standing in the lobby of the Emerald City Grand Hotel in Seattle, I began to realize that some family members are the ones holding the knife. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by people who should have loved you. I walked into the hotel lobby, feeling the thick carpet swallow the soles of my work boots. I had polished them, but they still looked like what they were. Boots that had walked through mud and manure for 50 years. I was wearing my best suit. It was a navy blue wool suit I bought 20 years ago for my church deacon duties. It was a little tight in the shoulders now, and the fabric was worn shiny at the elbows. But Martha, my late wife, always said I looked handsome in it. I reached up and adjusted my tie. It was a deep crimson red. Martha gave it to me for our 30th anniversary. It was the only splash of color I had. A little piece of her coming with me to watch our son start his new life. Just then, I saw her. Brittany, my new daughter-in-law. She was gliding across the marble floor in a white silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, surrounded by a swarm of bridesmaids. She looked beautiful, in the way a diamond looks beautiful. Cold, hard, and expensive. She stopped in front of me. She did not smile. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my trip from Montana was. She just pointed a manicured finger at my chest. "That tie," she said, her voice low and sharp like broken glass. "It has to go." I blinked, confused. I looked down at the red silk. "Excuse me?" I asked. "It ruins the aesthetic, Harlan," she sighed, rolling her eyes as if explaining calculus to a toddler. "The theme is champagne, blush, and ivory. That red is aggressive. It screams cheap. It will clash with the flower wall in the photos. Take it off." I felt a lump form in my throat. "This was Martha's," I said quietly. "She gave it to me." "I don't care who gave it to you," Brittany snapped. "You are already going to stick out like a sore thumb in that suit. Don't make it worse. If you want to be in any pictures, lose the tie. Or better yet, go find a seat in the back and stay out of the way." She turned on her heel and marched away, her bridesmaids giggling as they followed. I stood there alone in the middle of the busy lobby. My hand went to the knot of the tie. My fingers trembled. For a second, I wanted to turn around, walk out, and drive the 12 hours back to my cabin. But I couldn't. Travis was my son. Martha would have wanted me to be there. So, I slowly untied the red silk. I rolled it up carefully and shoved it deep into my pocket. It felt like I was shoving my dignity in there with it. I made my way to the ballroom. It was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I approached the hostess stand to find my table. I expected to be at table 1 or 2 with the family. I am the father of the groom, after all. Name, the hostess asked, not looking up. Harlan Ford, I said. She scanned the list. Her finger went down, down, past the single digits, past the 20s. Oh, here you are, she said. Table 40. 40. I looked at the diagram. Table 40 was not near the dance floor. It was not near the head table. It was in the far back corner, shoved behind a massive decorative pillar, right next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. I walked through the crowd. People looked through me like I was invisible. When I reached table 40, I realized exactly what it was. It was the vendor table. There were 3 chairs, one for me, one for the photographer who was currently out taking pictures, and one for the DJ's assistant. I sat down. The chair was wobbly. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, a blast of steam and the smell of dish soap hit me in the face. Waiters rushed past, bumping my chair without apologizing. I looked across the vast room. I could see the head table on a raised platform, bathed in golden light. I could see Travis laughing, holding a glass of champagne. He looked happy. He didn't look like he was missing me at all. A waiter hurried by and slammed a bottle of wine onto my table, using it as a resting station before serving the VIP guests. I looked at the label. It was a vintage French wine. I know a little bit about wine because Martha used to read about them in her magazines. This bottle cost $2,000. $2,000. The number echoed in my head. I felt the blood drain from my face. $2,000 was exactly the cost of the specialized medication Martha needed in her final month. The medication that could have eased her pain. I remembered calling Travis, begging him for help. I remembered him crying on the phone, telling me, "Dad, I'm so sorry. Business is bad. I can barely pay my rent. I have nothing to give." I had believed him. I had sold my truck. I had sold my tools. I had eaten instant noodles for months to buy Martha that medicine, and even then, I could only afford half the dose. And now, I was staring at a bottle of wine that cost the same amount, sitting on a table at a wedding that must have cost $500,000. Travis wasn't broke. He had never been broke. He just didn't want to waste his money on a dying mother. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. I gripped the edge of the table to stop myself from flipping it over. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march up to that head table and ask him why his mother's pain was worth less than a bottle of fermented grapes. But I didn't. I sat there. I took a deep breath. Just then, an older woman in a sparkling silver dress approached my table. She looked a bit lost, holding a glass of sherry. "Excuse me," she said, smiling kindly. "It is so loud up there near the speakers. Do you mind if I rest here for a moment? You look like a friendly face. Are you a relative? I don't see a boutonniere on your lapel." I opened my mouth to speak. I wanted to say, "Yes, I am the father of the groom." But before I could get a single word out, a shadow fell over the table. It was Brittany. She had changed into her second dress of the evening. She appeared out of nowhere, her hand gripping the older woman's arm with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Vanderwall," Brittany chirped, her voice high and fake. "I see you found our little charity project." The woman, Mrs. Vanderwall, looked confused. "Charity project?" "Yes," Brittany laughed, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "This is Harlan. He used to be the gardener for my family's summer estate years ago. He has fallen on some very hard times, poor thing. No family, no money. So, Travis and I thought it would be a nice Christian gesture to invite him here for a hot meal. You know how it is. We try to give back to the less fortunate." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs. Gardener. Charity case. Less fortunate. Mrs. Vanderwall looked at me, her eyes filling with sympathy. "Oh," she whispered. How incredibly generous of you, Brittany. That is so sweet." She turned to me. "I hope you enjoy the meal, sir." I couldn't breathe. I looked up at Brittany. She was staring right at me, her eyes daring me to speak, daring me to ruin her perfect night, daring me to tell the truth. I looked across the room at Travis. He was looking right at us. He saw his wife standing there. He saw his father sitting in the dark corner. He saw the humiliation. And he did nothing. He just took a sip of his $2,000 wine and looked away. That was the moment. That was the exact moment the father in me died, and something else was born. I forced a smile. It was a painful, tight smile. "Thank you, ma'am," I said, my voice raspy. "The food is very good." Brittany beamed, satisfied that the dog knew its place. "Come along, Mrs. Vanderwall. Let me introduce you to the senator." They walked away, leaving me alone in the shadow of the pillar. I reached into my pocket and touched the red silk tie. I wasn't just a gardener to them. I was a prop. I was a tax write-off. I was nothing. But they forgot one thing. Gardeners know how to clear weeds, and they know how to dig graves. I didn't stay for the cake. I stood up, walked out the back door, and took the long bus ride home to Montana. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I would never see them again. But I was wrong. Because 3 days later, I was watering the hydrangeas in front of my cabin when I heard the roar of an engine. A luxury SUV came tearing up my dirt driveway, crushing the very flowers I was tending. The door opened, and Travis stepped out. But he wasn't wearing a tuxedo this time. He was wearing a panic-stricken face. And he wasn't alone. The humiliation at table 40 was suffocating. The clinking of silverware against fine china sounded like hammers pounding inside my skull. I felt the gaze of the other guests burning into the back of my neck, or maybe I just imagined it. Either way, I needed air. I needed water. I needed to wash the feeling of being a charity case off my skin. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy as lead, and made my way toward the restrooms near the banquet hall entrance. The restroom was more luxurious than my entire cabin. It was lined with black marble and gold fixtures. The air smelled of expensive cedarwood cologne and fresh linen. I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap. The water was ice cold. I splashed it onto my face, watching the droplets run down my wrinkles in the expansive mirror. I looked at the man staring back at me. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked exactly like what Brittany had called me. A gardener. A nobody. I reached for a paper towel, my hands still trembling slightly from the encounter in the lobby. Just as I was about to leave, the heavy oak door swung open. Laughter echoed off the marble walls. Loud, boisterous laughter. I knew that laugh. It was the laugh of a boy I had taught to fish. The laugh of a boy I had carried on my shoulders. It was Travis. Instinct kicked in. I don't know why, but I didn't want to face him yet. I didn't want him to see me wiping water off my face in a bathroom while he was out there celebrating. I stepped back into the handicap stall at the far end and clicked the lock. I just wanted to wait for them to leave. I held my breath, standing perfectly still. I recognized the other voice immediately. It was Julian, Travis's best man. A slick city boy who worked in hedge funds and always looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. "Man," Julian said, his voice echoing in the tiled room. "Did you see your old man out there?" I mean, seriously, Travis, that suit looks like he dug it up from a grave. And that tie. Brittany was about to have an aneurysm. I heard the sound of a lighter flicking, then the long exhale of smoke. They were vaping in the bathroom. Yeah, I know, Travis replied. His voice didn't sound apologetic. It sounded annoyed. He is a disaster. I told him to buy a new suit, but you know how he is. Cheap, stubborn. He clings to that old life like it actually matters. He looks like he is starving, Julian laughed. Does he even have running water out there in the boonies? Who knows, Travis scoffed. But look, forget about him. We need to talk about the real problem. The sharks are circling, Julian. My phone has been blowing up all morning. I had to block 3 numbers just to get through the ceremony. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the stall door. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Sharks. Blocking numbers. What was he talking about? How deep are you? Julian's voice dropped an octave. Be honest with me. 200, Travis whispered. But in the silence of the bathroom, it sounded like a scream. 200,000. I almost gasped. I had to cover my mouth with my hand. $200,000. My son. The boy who I thought was running a successful tech startup. The boy who told me he was too busy with investors to come visit his dying mother. 200 large? Julian let out a low whistle. Damn, Travis. I told you to stay away from the tables. You said you had a system. You said the crypto thing was a sure bet. It was a sure bet, Travis snapped, his voice cracking with stress. It was supposed to be. But the market crashed, and then I tried to make it back at the private games, and it just spiraled. They are giving me 2 weeks, Julian. 2 weeks before they start coming after assets. I felt sick. My stomach churned. The tech startup was a lie. The busy schedule was a lie. It was gambling. It was greed. He had ignored his mother's pleas for help, not because he was building a future, but because he was gambling it away. So what is the plan? Julian asked. You can't ask Brittany. If she finds out you are broke, the marriage is over before the honeymoon starts. She is not exactly marrying you for your personality, bro. No offense. None taken, Travis chuckled darkly. She would leave me in a heartbeat. No, I have a plan. Why do you think I agreed to let the old man come today? Why do you think I convinced Brittany to let us go to Montana for the honeymoon instead of Paris? I froze. My blood ran cold. The ranch? Julian asked. I thought you said it was worthless. Just rocks and dirt. It is, Travis said. To a farmer, it is worthless. The cabin is a teardown. But land is land, Julian. I had a buddy run a title search. It is 5,000 acres. Even as wasteland, I can unload it to a developer for enough to cover the debt and have a little cushion left over. But it is his land, Julian pointed out. Travis laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Look at him, Julian. He is 70. He is shaking. He is confused. I am going to tell him we are there to take care of him. I will tell him the maintenance is too much for him. Brittany is a real estate agent, remember? She has the paperwork ready. We will get him to sign a power of attorney. We will tell him it is for his medical insurance or something. Once I have that signature, the land is sold. And what about him? Julian asked. Where does he go? State facility, Travis said casually, like he was talking about disposing of an old couch. There are plenty of government homes for seniors. He will have a bed and 3 meals a day. It is better than he deserves. He is losing his mind anyway. Did you see him staring at that wine bottle? He is practically senile. I am doing him a favor. The water in the tap dripped. Drip, drip, drip. I stood there in the stall, my hands clenched into fists so tight that my fingernails cut into my palms. I felt a drop of warm blood well up in my hand. But I didn't feel the pain. The pain in my heart was far greater. My son, my flesh and blood. He wasn't just a failure. He was a predator. He was planning to sell the land that had been in my wife's family for 3 generations. He was planning to throw me into a state home to rot just to pay off his gambling debts. And he was going to use his wife, the woman who despised me, to do it. I wanted to kick the door open. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his expensive tuxedo and drag him to the mirror so he could see the monster he had become. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. But I didn't. I am a veteran. I learned a long time ago that you never fire your weapon until you have a clear shot. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would spin it. He would gaslight me. He would tell Brittany I was crazy, that I was imagining things. And she would believe him. They would band together, and I would be the senile old man making a scene at a wedding. Number. Silence was my weapon now. I heard the door open again. "Let's go," Travis said. "Brittany is going to wonder where I am." "Smile, Julian. We are celebrating." They walked out. The door clicked shut. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I unlocked the stall door and stepped out. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The sadness was gone from my eyes. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. I adjusted my collar. I didn't put the red tie back on. I didn't need it. I didn't need their approval anymore. I walked out of the restroom, but I didn't go back to the ballroom. I didn't go back to table 40. I walked straight to the exit. I walked past the concierge, past the valet parking where the Ferraris and Porsches were lined up. I walked out into the cool Seattle night. I didn't have a car. I walked 3 miles to the Greyhound station. I bought a one-way ticket back to Montana. I sat in the back of the bus as it pulled out of the city. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by the dark, looming shapes of the mountains. I watched my reflection in the window. Travis thought I was senile. He thought I was weak. He thought he could come to my home, smile in my face, and steal everything I had left. He was coming for me. He and his shark of a wife were coming to take my life away. Let them come. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled red tie. I wrapped it around my hand, tightening it like a tourniquet. He wanted to play games. He wanted to gamble. Fine. I would give him the biggest gamble of his life. But he didn't know that the house always wins. And on Silver Creek Ranch, I am the house. The bus rattled on into the night, carrying me toward the war that was about to begin. It was a Tuesday morning, 5 days after the wedding fiasco in Seattle. The Montana air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I was standing in the front yard of the cabin, the garden hose cool and heavy in my hand. I was watering the blue hydrangeas. These weren't just bushes to me. Martha and I had planted them 30 years ago, on the very day we moved into this small cabin after handing the main ranch house over to the trust management. Martha loved them. In her final months, when the pain was too bad for her to walk, I would pick the biggest blooms and put them in a vase by her bedside. Keeping them alive now felt like keeping a small part of her breath in this world. The water hissed softly against the green leaves, a peaceful rhythm that I had grown to cherish in my solitude. Then, the peace was shattered. It started as a low rumble in the distance, echoing off the canyon walls, before turning into a mechanical roar. I looked down the long dirt driveway. A cloud of dust was rising, billowing up like smoke from a forest fire. A vehicle was tearing up the road at a speed that was reckless even for the highway, let alone a private gravel lane. It was a black SUV, a Range Rover. It looked like a shiny metallic beetle out of place in the rugged landscape. I waved my free hand, signaling for them to slow down. The driveway curved sharply right in front of the cabin, but the driver didn't lift his foot off the gas. If anything, the engine revved louder. The massive vehicle drifted around the bend, tires spinning, losing traction on the loose gravel. The back end swung out wide. "No," I whispered, freezing in place. The rear tire jumped the wooden border of the flower bed. I heard the sickening crunch of wood snapping, followed by the wet, tearing sound of vegetation being ground into the mud. The SUV plowed directly through the center of the hydrangeas, flattening the vibrant blue flowers under 2 tons of luxury steel, before screeching to a halt inches from the front porch steps. Silence returned, but it was a ringing, tense silence. Dust settled over the crushed remains of Martha's garden. I stared at the tire tracks. The sap from the broken stems smelled sharp and green. It felt like someone had just run over my foot. The driver's door opened. Travis stepped out. He was wearing designer sunglasses and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly heating bill. He looked around at the towering pines and the rustic cabin, taking a deep breath as if he owned the very air. "Hey, Dad," he called out, a bright plastic smile plastered on his face. "Surprise!" Before I could answer, the passenger door opened. Brittany emerged. She was wearing white sneakers, and the moment her foot touched the dusty ground, she grimaced. She looked at the cabin with the same expression one might look at a roadkill carcass. I dropped the hose. The water continued to pool around the destroyed flowers, turning the dust into mud. I didn't walk toward them to hug them. I walked toward the tire tracks. "You ran over the flowers," I said, my voice low. I pointed to the mangled blue petals sticking out from under the mudguard. "Those were your mother's." Travis glanced down, barely registering the destruction. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, casually taking off his sunglasses and cleaning them on his shirt. "The handling on this thing is a beast on gravel. I'll buy you a new plant, Dad." "It is just a bush. Don't be so dramatic." "Just a bush." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. I wanted to tell him that money couldn't buy a 30-year-old root system. I wanted to tell him that some things couldn't be replaced with a swipe of a credit card. But I swallowed the words. I looked at the back of the car. I watched as my son, a grown man, scrambled to obey her like a bellboy. He hauled out 6 hard-shell suitcases, all stamped with the famous monogram. They carried them up the porch stairs, the wheels thumping loudly, shaking the loose floorboards. Brittany brushed past me, leaving a trail of expensive perfume that clashed violently with the scent of the pine forest. I followed them inside. This cabin was my sanctuary. It was small, yes. The floors creaked. The furniture was mismatched. A plaid armchair I had sat in for 20 years, a coffee table covered in my whittling projects, and shelves lined with Martha's collection of porcelain birds and old vinyl records. It was cozy. It was lived in. It was home. Brittany stood in the center of the living room, hands on her hips, turning in a slow circle. She wasn't looking at the family photos on the wall. She was looking at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. She wrinkled her nose, her upper lip curling in disgust. "Ugh," she groaned, the sound vibrating in the small room. "God, Travis, what is that smell?" "It smells like wood smoke," I said, standing in the doorway. "And sage." No, she countered, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. It smells like mildew. It smells like old people. Honestly, Harlan, it smells like dead people in here. It is suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs. She walked over to the sofa and picked up the Afghan blanket that was draped over the back. Martha had crocheted that blanket during the winter of '98. It was multicolored and frayed at the edges. Brittany held it with 2 fingers, holding it away from her body as if it were contagious. "Look at this," she said, dropping the blanket back onto the cushion as if it burned her. "And look at all this clutter." She gestured to the shelves, to the porcelain birds, to the stacks of National Geographic magazines I had saved since the '80s. "We can't live like this, Travis," she stated firmly. "It is unsanitary. It is depressing. I am not going to spend my honeymoon living in a museum of junk." Junk. "Tomorrow," she continued, pulling out her phone and tapping on the screen, "I am calling a professional cleaning crew from Missoula. We need to gut this place. We need to get rid of all this trash, rip up these dusty carpets, and fumigate. We need to make this place livable if we are going to be stuck here." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was talking about erasing my life. She was talking about throwing away the physical memory of my wife. I turned to Travis. He was struggling with a heavy suitcase near the bedroom door. I looked him dead in the eye. This was his moment. This was the moment for the son I raised to step up. I didn't speak, but my eyes were screaming at him. "Tell her, Travis. Tell her that blanket isn't trash. Tell her she can't throw away your mother's things. Defend this house." Travis looked at me. He saw the pain in my eyes. He saw the desperation. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of shame in his face. But then he looked at Brittany, who was tapping her foot impatiently. He shrugged. "She has a point, Dad," he said. He didn't even sound sorry. He sounded tired. "Brittany is used to a certain standard of living. It is a bit hoardish in here. Just let her handle it. She knows about interior design. It will be cleaner. It will be better for you." He turned his back on me and shoved the suitcase into the guest room, kicking the door shut behind him. I stood there in the living room, alone with the woman who hated me. Brittany smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "Don't worry, Harlan," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You won't even recognize this place when I am done with it." She brushed past me to follow Travis, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. I stood frozen. Outside, the water from the hose was still running, turning the earth into mud over the crushed flowers. Inside, the invasion had begun. They hadn't come to visit. They had come to conquer. They thought I was a feeble old man who would roll over and let them strip the meat from my bones. I walked over to the window and looked out at the vast, wild expanse of the ranch that they couldn't see past the tree line. They didn't know about the trust. They didn't know about the claws. They thought they were the predators entering a sheep pen. They had no idea they had just walked into the den of a bear who had nothing left to lose. I went to the kitchen and turned off the coffee pot. I didn't drink any. I needed my nerves steady. I needed to be sharp. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But I would fight it my way, quietly, until the trap snapped shut. The walk back from the general store was 5 miles long. I carried 2 heavy paper sacks of groceries in my arms, the weight digging into my muscles. My truck was gone, sold months ago to pay for the first round of Martha's chemotherapy, so walking was my only option. The sun was beating down on my neck, but the heat outside was nothing compared to the slow-burning fire in my chest. I had spent $40 at the store, $40 of my own money, taken from the emergency cash I kept hidden inside an old coffee tin in the shed. I had to buy bread, eggs, milk, and coffee. Basic things. Things that should have been in the refrigerator already. But the fridge was empty, despite the mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage sitting in my living room. Travis and Brittany had been here for 5 days, and they hadn't bought a single carton of milk. They ordered pizza from the only delivery place in town that would drive this far out, and they ate it in front of me without offering a slice. When I asked Brittany if she could pick up some groceries on her way back from her nail appointment in the city, she just laughed and said she didn't carry cash and her cards were for business expenses only. So here I was, 70 years old, trudging down a dirt road like a pack mule to feed the people who were currently occupying my home like an invading army. As I approached the cabin, I saw the windows were open. That was strange. I always kept them closed during the heat of the day to keep the cool air in. I walked up the porch steps, the grocery bags rustling loudly in the quiet afternoon. I kicked the front door open with my boot and stepped inside. The first thing I heard was a voice. It wasn't a normal speaking voice. It was high-pitched, energetic, and completely fake. It was Brittany's voice, but amplified, echoing down the hallway. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I am coming to you from this quaint, rustic little project house in the mountain. You would not believe the potential here. We are going to transform this shack into a chic retreat. My stomach dropped. The voice was coming from the master bedroom. I set the grocery bags down on the kitchen counter, not caring that the eggs might crack. I walked down the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my boots, a sound I knew by heart. I stopped at the door to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room where Martha and I had slept for 40 years. The room where she took her last breath while holding my hand. I pushed the door open. The room was unrecognizable. The heavy oak dresser that my grandfather built was shoved into a corner. The bed was stripped of its quilt and covered in a mountain of clothes. But that wasn't the worst of it. 2 massive ring lights on tripods were set up in the center of the room, blindingly bright. A large green screen was draped over the back wall, completely covering the window that looked out over the creek. Brittany was standing in front of the camera, holding a tube of lipstick. She was wearing a tight pink dress that looked ridiculous against the log walls. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy preening for her phone screen. So many of you have been asking about my skincare routine while I am out here in the wilderness, she chirped. It is so hard to stay glowing when you are surrounded by dust and decay, but you know I make it work. I stepped into the room. My eyes scanned the walls. Something was missing. The space above the headboard. The space where, for 30 years, the large framed portrait of Martha and me on our wedding day had hung. It was the first thing I looked at every morning. It was the last thing I looked at every night. It was gone. Where is it? I asked. My voice was low, trembling with a rage I hadn't felt since I was in the jungle in '69. Brittany jumped. She spun around, nearly dropping her lipstick. The ring light reflected in her eyes, making her look demonic. "Jesus, Harlan!" she shrieked. "You scared me to death! Can't you see I am live? I am streaming to 5,000 people right now. Get out of the shot! You look like a hobo!" I didn't move. I took a step forward. "Where is the picture, Brittany? The picture of my wife?" She rolled her eyes and sighed, a dramatic, exaggerated sound for her audience. "Oh my God, you mean that creepy black and white thing?" It was ruining the lighting balance. It was so gloomy. I took it down. "Where is it?" I repeated, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "Over there." She waved her hand dismissively toward the corner near the closet. I looked. There, Jammed into a plastic wastebasket was the frame. It was sticking out at an angle. The glass was shattered. A long, jagged crack ran right through Martha's smiling face. It was sitting on top of dirty makeup wipes and a half-eaten protein bar wrapper. The air left my lungs. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it burst. That photo was the only copy I had of that size. The negative was lost in a flood years ago. And she had thrown it in the trash like it was garbage. I let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. I lunged toward the trash can. I wasn't going for her. I was going for the picture. I wanted to pull it out, to save it from the filth. But Brittany saw an opportunity. She saw the camera still rolling. She saw a chance to be the victim. As I reached past her to grab the frame, she suddenly threw herself backward. I didn't even touch her. I was feet away from her, but she shrieked, a piercing, blood-curdling scream that must have blown out the speakers of everyone watching her stream. "Help!" she screamed, flailing her arms. "He is attacking me! Travis, help me!" She hit the floor with a thud, knocking over one of the ring lights. It crashed down, sending glass flying. She curled up into a ball, sobbing fake tears, covering her face. I froze, holding the broken picture frame in my hands. I looked down at her, bewildered. "What are you doing?" I whispered. Before I could process the insanity of the moment, I heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway. Travis burst into the room. His face was red, his eyes wild. "Brittany!" he yelled. He saw his wife on the floor, sobbing. He saw me standing over her, holding a broken object. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look at the fact that I was crying. He didn't look at the picture of his own mother in my hands. He made his choice instantly. "Dad, no!" he screamed. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into me. I wasn't expecting it. I am 70 years old. I am strong, but I wasn't braced for a tackle. I flew backward. My lower back hit the edge of the dresser with a sickening crunch. I crumpled to the floor, the breath knocked out of me. The picture frame slid across the floor, the glass shattering further. Travis stood over me, his chest heaving. His fists were clenched. He looked like he wanted to kick me. "What is wrong with you?" he spit, saliva flying from his mouth. "You crazy old man. You hit her? You actually hit her?" I gasped for air, clutching my side. Pain radiated up my spine. "No," I wheezed. "I didn't. She threw the picture in the trash." Travis didn't listen. He rushed to Brittany and scooped her up. She clung to him, burying her face in his neck, sobbing loudly. "He is crazy, Travis," she wailed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I was just filming my makeup tutorial and he came in screaming. He said he wanted me out of the house. He grabbed the light stand. I was so scared." Travis looked at me with pure hatred. It was a look I had never seen on my son's face. It was the look you give to a rabid dog that needs to be put down. "Get out," he growled at me. "Get out of this room." "Travis, listen to me," I pleaded, trying to sit up. "Look at the picture. It is your mother. She threw it in the garbage." "I don't care about a stupid picture," Travis yelled, his voice cracking. "I care about my wife." "You are losing it, Dad. I knew you were slipping, but this is assault. Do you understand that? We could have you arrested." He helped Brittany toward the door. She limped, favoring her right leg, even though she had fallen on her left side. She looked back at me over Travis's shoulder. For a split second, the sobbing stopped. She met my eyes, and she smirked. It was a tiny, fleeting smile of absolute victory. They left the room. I heard them in the hallway. Travis was cooing to her, apologizing, promising that he would handle it, that he wouldn't let the old man hurt her again. I lay on the floor of my bedroom for a long time. The pain in my back was throbbing, but the clarity in my mind was sharper than ever. The son I raised was dead. The boy who used to cry when he stepped on a bug was gone. The man who had just shoved his 70-year-old father into a dresser was a stranger. A dangerous stranger. I slowly pulled myself up. I crawled over to the broken picture frame. I picked it up with shaking hands. I brushed the glass shards off Martha's face. I kissed her forehead on the glossy paper. "I am sorry, Martha," I whispered to the empty room. "I tried to be nice. I tried to be patient. But they don't want peace." I stood up, clutching the photo to my chest. I didn't go after them. I didn't yell. I walked out of the master bedroom and went down the hall to the small guest room at the back of the house, the room they had relegated me to. I went inside and locked the door. I shoved a chair under the handle. I sat on the narrow cot and took a deep breath. I reached down and unlaced my left work boot. Inside the heel, there was a hollow compartment I had carved out years ago for emergencies. I pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges. It had a phone number on it. It was the private cell number of Patrick O'Malley, the toughest lawyer in the state, and the only man I trusted to help me bury the bodies. Not literally, but financially. I unfolded the paper. My hands stopped shaking. The tears dried up on my face. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. "Patrick," I said. "It's Harlan. Get the paperwork ready. We are going with the nuclear option." The sun had gone down, painting the Montana sky in bruises of purple and black. But the temperature inside the cabin was rising. The air in the kitchen, usually smelling of stale coffee and sawdust, was now thick with an aroma I hadn't smelled in years. It was the rich, heavy scent of searing meat, garlic, and rosemary. My stomach growled, a deep, painful rumble that reminded me I hadn't eaten a proper meal since I walked back from town with those groceries. I unlocked the door to the guest room and stepped out into the hallway. The house was quiet, except for the sizzling sound coming from the stove. I walked into the kitchen. Brittany was standing there, wearing an apron over her designer dress, flipping steaks in my cast-iron skillet. But these weren't just any steaks. Even from the doorway, I could see the marbling. Thick, white veins of fat running through deep red meat. Wagyu. I had seen it in magazines. That was meat that cost more per pound than I used to make in a week of fencing work. Travis was sitting at the table, a bottle of red wine open in front of him. He looked up when I entered, then quickly looked down at his glass, swirling the liquid nervously. The tension from the bedroom incident was still hanging in the room like smoke. But hunger is a primal thing. It pushes pride aside. I pulled out my usual chair, the wooden one with the slightly uneven leg, and sat down. I waited. I watched as Brittany plated the food. She placed a massive, glistening steak on Travis's plate, adding a heap of roasted asparagus and truffle mashed potatoes. Then she plated her own, humming a little tune as she arranged the garnish. Finally, she turned to me. She picked up a small, chipped bowl from the counter and set it down in front of me with a clatter. "There you go, Harlan," she said, her voice bright and cheery, as if she hadn't just framed me for assault 3 hours ago. I looked down at the bowl. It was soup, but to call it soup was an insult to cooking. It was a pale, watery liquid with a few sad, translucent noodles floating in it. It was canned chicken noodle soup, watered down to stretch the volume. It smelled like wet cardboard and sodium. I looked at their plates. The steak was resting, juices pooling darkly on the ceramic. The smell was intoxicating. I looked up at Brittany. "What is this?" I asked, gesturing to the bowl. "Dinner," she replied, taking her seat and unfolding a napkin across her lap. "You are eating steak," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Wagyu steak. And I am eating dishwater." Brittany sighed, cutting a piece of meat and popping it into her mouth. She chewed slowly, closing her eyes in exaggerated delight, before swallowing and looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, Harlan, don't be difficult. I am doing this for you. I read your medical chart while I was organizing your papers. You have high blood pressure, don't you? And at your age, red meat is a death sentence. It causes gout. It causes strokes. Travis and I would never forgive ourselves if we fed you something that stopped your heart." She pointed her fork at me. "This soup is low sodium. It is easy to digest. It is what old people need. You should be thanking me for monitoring your diet." I looked at Travis. He was cutting into his steak, keeping his eyes glued to his plate. He was shoveling the expensive meat into his mouth as fast as he could, as if eating it quickly would make the guilt disappear. "Travis," I said, "you are going to let me eat this slop while you eat a $50 steak." He paused, a piece of meat halfway to his mouth. He chewed, swallowed hard, and then mumbled without looking at me. "She is right, Dad. The doctor said you need to watch your cholesterol. We are just looking out for you." Looking out for me. The words felt like a slap. I looked back at the soup. I picked up my spoon. My hand was trembling, not from age, but from the effort it took not to flip the table over. I needed to eat. My body was weak, and I knew that if I was going to fight them, I needed fuel. Even if the fuel was garbage. I took a spoonful. It was lukewarm and tasted of metal. I swallowed it. Brittany and Travis continued to eat, chatting about the wine, about the crisp mountain air, completely ignoring the fact that the man who owned the roof over their heads was being starved at his own table. As I ate, my eyes wandered to the kitchen trash can. It was an open-top bin near the fridge. It was overflowing with the packaging from their cooking spree. I saw the butcher paper from the steaks, and right on top of it, crumpled into a ball but partially unraveling, was a long white receipt. Something about it caught my eye. The logo at the top was from a high-end gourmet market in Missoula, a place I had never set foot in. But it wasn't the store that mattered. It was the bottom of the receipt. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to stretch, and squinted. My eyesight was the one thing that hadn't failed me yet. I saw the total. $412 for one meal. And below that, the payment method. Visa, ending in 4598. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. 4598. That was my number. That was the number of the emergency credit card I kept in the safe. The card Travis had asked me to sign for 2 days ago. He had told me, "Dad, the electric company is threatening to cut the power because the autopay didn't go through. I need you to authorize this card just for the utilities so we don't freeze to death." I had believed him. I had signed the authorization form he put in front of me because I didn't want the lights to go out. But he hadn't used it for the electric bill. He had used it to buy Wagyu beef. He had used it to buy the wine he was drinking. I looked closer at the trash. Sticking out from under the butcher paper was another receipt, a yellow one, from a designer boutique. I could just make out the total, $2,000, and the item description, handbag. I slowly lowered the spoon back into the bowl. The watery soup suddenly tasted like bile. They weren't just living off me. They were robbing me. They had tricked me into handing over my credit line, and now they were bleeding it dry, buying luxury goods and gourmet food while feeding me watered-down soup and telling me it was for my health. I looked at Travis. He was laughing at something Brittany said, his face flushed with wine and greed. He was eating my money. He was wearing my money. He was stealing my future to pay for his present. A cold calm washed over me. It was the clarity of the battlefield. When you realize the enemy has breached the perimeter, you don't panic. You assess. You plan. You execute. I finished the soup. Every drop. I scraped the bowl clean. I needed every single calorie. "That was delicious, Brittany," I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "Thank you for thinking of my heart." Brittany looked surprised, then smug. "See, Travis? I told you he would appreciate it eventually." "You are welcome, Harlan." I stood up. "I'm tired," I said. "The country air makes you sleepy. I'm going to bed." "Don't stay up too late," Travis mumbled, pouring himself another glass of wine. I walked back to the guest room. I closed the door. I locked it. I shoved the chair back under the handle. But I didn't get into bed. I sat in the dark and waited. I waited until the sounds of their laughter died down. I waited until the lights under the door gap went dark. I waited until I heard the heavy, wine-induced snoring of my son coming from down the hall. It was 2 a.m. The house was silent. I went to the window. It was small, but I was thin. I unlatched the lock. It was stiff from years of disuse, but I forced it open. The night air rushed in, cold and biting. I climbed out. My boots hit the soft earth of the flower bed, the one Brittany hadn't destroyed yet. I stood in the darkness, looking back at the house. It used to be a home. Now it was a crime scene. And I was the victim. But not for long. I pulled my jacket collar up against the wind. I started walking. I wasn't walking to town this time. I was walking to the highway junction, 5 miles away. I had a meeting to prepare for, and I needed to make sure that when the sun came up, I was armed with more than just righteous anger. I needed the law. I touched the pocket of my jacket where I had hidden the phone number of Patrick O'Malley. "Enjoy the steak, Travis," I whispered into the wind. "It is going to be the most expensive meal you ever ate." I walked for an hour in the pitch-black darkness before a trucker hauling timber pulled over and gave me a lift to the junction. I didn't say much, and neither did he. That is the way it is in Montana. We respect silence. I got out at the Rusty Spoon, a 24-hour diner that sat like a beacon of yellow light in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the waitress had been working the night shift since the Reagan administration. I pushed open the glass door, the little bell chiming overhead. The diner was mostly empty, save for a couple of long-haul drivers hunched over pie at the counter. I scanned the booths. There, in the back corner, sitting under a flickering neon beer sign, was Patrick O'Malley. To anyone else, Patrick looked like a retired mechanic. He wore a flannel shirt that had seen better days and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But I knew better. Patrick was the sharpest legal mind in the tri-state area. We had served in Vietnam together. He had dragged me out of a burning rice paddy in '69, and I had covered him when he took a bullet in the leg a week later. We didn't just have a friendship. We had a bond forged in blood and mud. I slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't say hello. He just pushed a steaming mug of black coffee toward me. "You look like hell, Harlan," he grunted, his voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. "I feel like hell," I replied, wrapping my cold hands around the warm ceramic mug. "I walked out of my own house, Patrick. I had to climb out a window like a teenager because my son and his wife are occupying the place like it is enemy territory." Patrick took a sip of his coffee, his eyes narrowing. "I told you this would happen. I told you when Martha passed that the vultures would circle. You should have told Travis about the estate then." I shook my head. No. If I had told him about the money, I would never have known if he loved me or my bank account. And now I have my answer. He loves the account. He doesn't even know the account exists, and he is already trying to sell the land out from under me. Patrick reached down to the floor and pulled up a thick leather briefcase. He set it on the table with a heavy thud. He clicked the latches open and pulled out a blue folder. He slid it across the greasy table toward me. "Open it," he said. I opened the folder. It was the quarterly statement for the Silver Creek Trust. I scanned the columns of numbers. My eyes stopped at the bottom line. The bold print seemed to jump off the page. $12,400,000. I stared at the number. $12 million. "That is the wind energy lease payment that just cleared yesterday," Patrick said quietly. "The power company is leasing 2,000 acres of your northern ridge for their turbines. It is a 20-year contract, Harlan. You are not just rich. You are wealthy. You have enough cash liquid right now to buy this entire town and fire the mayor if you wanted to. And yet, you are letting your daughter-in-law feed you watered-down soup?" I closed the folder. The number didn't make me feel happy. It made me feel sick. I had $12 million sitting in a bank, and my son was willing to throw me into a state nursing home for a $200,000 gambling debt. "He is in trouble, Patrick," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I overheard him in the bathroom at the wedding. He owes sharks, bad people. He thinks the ranch is worthless dirt. He plans to get me to sign it over, sell it to a developer for a quick $1 million, pay his debt, and dump me." Patrick slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Then cut him off," he growled. "Sign the eviction notice. I have it right here. One signature, Harlan. I will have the sheriff there in an hour. We throw them out. We change the locks. You go back to living your life. Why are we playing games?" "Because he is my son," I said, "and because I need to know how far he will go." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipts I had fished out of the trash. I smoothed them out on the table next to the trust fund statement. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the credit card receipt. He tricked me into authorizing my emergency card. He said it was for electricity. He spent $400 on steaks I wasn't allowed to eat. He bought her a handbag worth $2,000. Patrick looked at the receipts, his face turning red with anger. "This is fraud, Harlan. This is elder abuse. We can nail them on this alone." "Not yet," I said. "I want the big fish. I want them to show their true colors in a way that they can never take back. I want them to put it in writing." "What do you mean?" Patrick asked, leaning in. "They are going to try to make me sign a power of attorney," I said. "I can feel it. They are setting the stage. They are calling me senile. They are gaslighting me about my memory. They want legal control over me so they can liquidate the ranch without my consent." Patrick shook his head violently. "No, absolutely not. Harlan, do not sign a power of attorney." If you sign a durable power of attorney in the state of Montana, you are handing them the keys to your life. They can empty your accounts. They can sell the land. They can commit you to a facility. It is almost impossible to undo once the ink is dry, especially if they have witnesses saying you were willing. I am going to sign it, I said calmly. Patrick looked at me like I had lost my mind. Are you crazy? Did you hear a word I just said? I am going to sign it, I repeated. But I am not going to sign it as Harlan Ford. I leaned across the table and lowered my voice. Do you remember Article 9 of the trust, Patrick? The one Martha insisted on? Patrick paused. He frowned, thinking back. The bad boy clause? Exactly. The clause that says if any beneficiary attempts to seize control of the estate through coercion, fraud, or by declaring the primary trustee incompetent, they are automatically disinherited. Stripped of everything. No second chances. Patrick nodded slowly. Yes, but to trigger that clause, you need proof. You need proof that they coerced you. That is why I need you, I said. I need you to be the witness. I need you to come to the cabin. But not yet. I need you to wait until the moment the pen touches the paper. Patrick sat back, rubbing his chin. He looked at the old veteran sitting across from him. He saw the fire in my eyes. It was the same fire he had seen in the jungle 50 years ago. The look of a man who was walking into an ambush because he knew he had a grenade in his pocket. It is risky, Harlan, he warned. If they get a crooked notary, if they manage to file that paper before we can intervene, you could lose control of the 12 million. You could lose the land. I trust you, Patrick, I said. You won't let that happen. Patrick sighed. He picked up his coffee cup and drained it. Okay, he said. Okay, you stubborn old mule. We do it your way. But you have to be careful. They're desperate. Desperate people are dangerous. If they think you are onto them, they might not wait for a signature. They might try to help nature take its course. Do not eat anything she cooks unless you see her eat it first. Do not go down the stairs in front of them. I know, I said. I am sleeping with one eye open. I stood up. I have to get back before they wake up and find me gone. If they ask, I was sleepwalking. Patrick reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was strong. Harlan, he said softly, I am sorry about Travis. I know how much you loved that boy. I looked down at his hand, then up at his eyes. I loved the boy he was, I said, my voice choking up for the first time that night. But that boy is gone. Now I have to deal with the man who took his place. I pulled my arm away and walked out of the diner. The wind had picked up. It howled through the canyon, sounding like a morning song. I buttoned my jacket and started the long walk back to the cabin, back to the enemy lines. I had $12 million in the bank, but as I walked through the dark, I felt like the poorest man on earth. But poverty has its advantages. It makes you invisible. And invisibility was exactly what I needed to spring the trap. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the jagged peaks of the mountains when I slipped back through the window of the guest room. My joints ached from the cold night air and the long walk, but my mind was razor sharp. I locked the window, shoved the chair back under the door handle, and lay down on the cot, fully dressed. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, rehearsing my role. Patrick had warned me. To pull this off, I couldn't just be quiet. I had to be confused. I had to become the very thing they accused me of being. A senile, helpless old man who couldn't be trusted with a toaster, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. I waited until I heard the heavy footsteps of Travis shuffling toward the bathroom. Then came the sound of the espresso machine in the kitchen, the fancy one they had brought with them because my old percolator wasn't good enough. It was showtime. I shuffled out of the bedroom. I stooped my shoulders, curving my spine to lose 2 inches of height. I let my jaw hang slightly slack. I walked into the kitchen, dragging my feet on the floorboards. Travis was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone with a desperate intensity. Brittany was at the counter, whisking matcha powder into a bowl. She didn't look up when I entered. "Good morning," I mumbled, my voice raspy and thin. Travis grunted without looking up. "Morning, Dad." I walked over to the cupboard. I opened it and stared inside, blinking slowly. I reached for a mug, but I let my hand shake violently. The mug rattled against the shelf. I grabbed it, then paused. I turned to Brittany. "Morning, Bessie," I said, giving her a vacant smile. "Did you feed the chickens yet?" The whisking stopped. Brittany froze. She turned slowly to look at me. Her eyes were wide, not with concern, but with shock. "What did you just call me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Bessie," I repeated, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You are a good girl, Bessie. Best bird dog I ever had." Travis dropped his phone on the table. He stared at me, then at Brittany. A slow, incredulous smile began to spread across his face. "Dad," he said, letting out a short, cruel laugh. "That isn't Bessie." Bessie was the golden retriever we had when I was 10. She died 15 years ago. That is my wife. That is Brittany. I blinked, feigning confusion. I looked at Brittany, then back at Travis. I scratched my head. "Brittany," I muttered. "Oh, right, Brittany. Where is Bessie then? I thought I heard her barking." Brittany didn't get angry this time. Instead, she looked at Travis, and a look passed between them. It was a look of pure, unadulterated opportunity. It was the look a wolf gives when it realizes the deer has a broken leg. She walked over to Travis and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Did you hear that? He thinks I am a dog. He doesn't even know what year it is." I turned back to the counter. I needed to up the stakes. Being confused wasn't enough. I needed to be dangerous. I needed to give them a reason to act fast. I reached for the sugar bowl, but I knocked it over on purpose. White granules spilled across the counter and onto the floor. I stared at the mess, then looked around helplessly. "Oh dear," I whispered. "The snow is getting in. I need to close the barn door." I walked past the mess, stepping in the sugar, grinding it into the floor. I went to the back door where a set of keys hung on a hook. These were the keys to the old tractor shed, but I acted like they were the most important thing in the world. "Where are they?" I panicked, patting my pockets frantically. "My keys! I can't find the keys to the truck. I need to go pick up Martha. She's waiting for me at the station." The room went dead silent. "Dad," Travis said, his voice dropping. "Mom is dead. She has been dead for 6 months. You know that." I stopped. I looked at him with wide, watery eyes. "Dead?" I whispered. No, she called me. She said she needed a ride." I sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of the kitchen, and buried my face in my hands. I started to rock back and forth. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Denying the reality of my wife's death, using her memory as a prop in a con game. It made me feel sick to my stomach. But I had to sell it. Brittany crouched down, but not to comfort me. She was examining me like a specimen. "He is totally gone, Travis," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is it. This is dementia. Rapid onset. He is hallucinating. He is a danger to himself." Travis looked at me, biting his lip. "You think? Maybe he is just tired." "Tired?" Brittany hissed. "He thinks I am a dog, and his dead wife is at the train station. If we leave him alone, he will burn the house down. We can't wait anymore, Travis. We can't wait for a doctor's appointment next week. We need to take control. Now. For his own safety. For his own safety." The magic words. I let out a low moan, still rocking. "I just want to go home," I mumbled. Travis stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out, avoiding my gaze. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. Do it. Call the guy." I stayed on the floor, listening. Brittany practically ran to the other room to grab her phone. I heard her walking out onto the porch, closing the glass door behind her to muffle her voice. But sound carries in the mountains, and my hearing was the one thing I hadn't lost. I focused. I could hear her voice, sharp and commanding. "Mr. Henderson," she said. "Yes, it is Brittany. Look, plans have changed. We can't wait until next week. We need you out here tomorrow morning, first thing." There was a pause. She was listening to the person on the other end. "I don't care if it is a rush job," she snapped. "I will pay double the fee." "Yes, the paperwork is ready. A durable power of attorney. Full control. Assets, medical, real estate, everything." Another pause. "No, he won't be a problem," she laughed, a cold, dry sound. "He is completely out of it. He doesn't even know who we are half the time. He will sign whatever we put in front of him if we tell him it is a permission slip for a field trip. Just get here. Bring your seal. And bring a witness if you can, someone who knows how to keep their mouth shut." She hung up. I heard the door slide open. She walked back into the kitchen. The heels of her sneakers squeaked on the sugar I had spilled. She walked over to Travis and put a hand on his shoulder. "It is done," she said. "Henderson is coming at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Once the ink is dry, we can put him in the facility in Missoula by the afternoon. They have a bed open in the memory care unit." Travis looked at me, still huddled on the floor. Is it a nice place?" he asked weakly. "It is fine," Brittany said dismissively. "It is clean. They will drug him up so he won't be scared. And then, babe, we can finally focus on us. We can sell this place, pay off your debts, and get back to our lives. We are saving him, really." Travis nodded slowly. "Yeah, we are saving him." I let out a long, shaky breath, letting them think it was a sob of confusion. But inside, I was smiling. They had taken the bait. They had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. They thought they were bringing in a notary to sign away my freedom. They didn't know they were inviting the executioner to their own funeral. I let them help me up. I let them guide me back to my room like a toddler. "Get some rest, Dad," Travis said, patting my arm. "Big day tomorrow." He had no idea how big. I went into my room and closed the door. I waited until I heard them go outside to inspect the damage to the car. Then I pulled out my burner phone one last time. I sent a single text message to Patrick O'Malley. 0900 hours. Bring the cavalry. I lay back on the cot. The game was over. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut. And I would finally find out if justice still existed in this world, or if it was just another thing I had imagined in my old age. The morning sun sliced through the kitchen window like a spotlight, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat at the wooden table, my hands resting on my knees, waiting. I had dressed carefully for this performance. I wore a faded flannel shirt that was buttoned wrong at the collar, and a pair of trousers that I had intentionally stained with coffee earlier that morning. I needed to look like a man who had given up. A man whose mind was dissolving like sugar in hot water. At exactly 9 o'clock, a car pulled up the gravel driveway. It wasn't the sheriff's cruiser. Not yet. It was a beat-up sedan, the kind of car that had seen too many miles and not enough maintenance. A man stepped out. He was short, carrying a bulky leather briefcase that looked like it had been bought at a pawn shop. He wore a suit that was a size too small, the fabric shiny at the elbows, and a tie that was stained with something that looked like mustard. Brittany met him at the door. I heard them whispering. The tone was urgent, conspiratorial. Then they walked into the kitchen. "Dad," Brittany said, her voice dripping with that fake nursery school teacher sweetness she had adopted over the last 24 hours. "Look who is here to see you. This is Mr. Henderson. He is a social worker from the county. He is here to help you get more money for your pension. Isn't that nice?" I looked at Mr. Henderson. He didn't look like a social worker. He looked like a man who bet on dog races and lost. He smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. He offered me a sweaty hand. "Good morning, Mr. Ford," he said, his voice oily and rushed. "I just need to verify a few things so we can increase your monthly benefits. The state wants to make sure you are taken care of." I shook his hand weakly, letting my grip remain limp. "More money," I mumbled, looking past him at the refrigerator. "That would be good. I need to buy a ticket for Martha. She's waiting at the station." Mr. Henderson glanced at Brittany. She gave him a sharp nod as if to say, "See, I told you he was gone." Henderson sat down across from me. He placed his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed loudly in the silent kitchen. He pulled out a stack of documents. They were thick, stapled together on blue legal paper. I knew exactly what they were. I had seen enough legal paperwork in my time as a union rep 40 years ago to recognize a durable power of attorney when I saw one. "Here we go," Henderson said, sliding the stack toward me. He uncapped a heavy black fountain pen and placed it on top of the paper. "We just need a few signatures here, here, and here. Just standard procedure to process the application." I stared at the paper. The text was dense, single-spaced blocks of legalese. At the top, in bold letters, it didn't say pension application. It said general durable power of attorney. Brittany was standing behind me, her hands gripping the back of my chair. I could feel her tension vibrating through the wood. Travis was pacing by the sink, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked pale. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Go ahead, Dad," Travis said, his voice tight and high. "Just sign it so Mr. Henderson can get back to work. It is for your own good." I reached for the pen. I made my hand tremble. I reached for it, missed, then grabbed it on the second try. I held it awkwardly, like a child learning to write. I looked at the paper. I squinted, bringing my face inches from the page. "Is this for the train ticket?" I asked, looking up at Henderson. Henderson forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "In a way, yes. It gets you the money for whatever you need, Mr. Ford. Just sign on the line next to the X." I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, rapid breathing of my son. I started to make a mark, a shaky line. Then I stopped. I pulled the pen back. Brittany let out a small, frustrated breath behind me. I leaned in closer to the document. I focused my eyes, dropping the act for a split second to read the paragraph directly above the signature line. It was Clause 4. Authority to dispose of real property. I read the words. Granting the agent full power to sell, convey, lease, mortgage, or otherwise dispose of any real property owned by the principal, including, but not limited to, the property known as Silver Creek Ranch. I looked up. I looked straight at Travis. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, his hands clenching and unclenching. I tapped the paper with the pen. Why does it say sell? I asked. My voice wasn't raspy this time. It was curious, innocent, but clear. What? Brittany snapped, stepping around the chair to look. Right here, I said, pointing to the word dispose. It says sell the ranch. Why would the pension people want to sell my ranch? The air in the room froze. Henderson looked at Brittany, panic flaring in his eyes. He hadn't expected the old man to read the fine print. He had expected a vegetable. Brittany recovered fast. She snatched the paper away from my face, pretending to smooth it out. "Oh, Dad, you are reading it wrong," she laughed. But the laugh was brittle and sharp. "You need glasses. That doesn't say sell. It says seal, like a stamp. It is just legal mumbo-jumbo. Your eyes are playing tricks on you again. Just like when you thought I was a dog yesterday, remember?" She pushed the paper back under my nose, pressing it down hard with her hand, covering the paragraph I had just read. "Just sign at the X, Harlan," she commanded, her voice dropping the sweet act. "Stop wasting everyone's time." Travis stepped forward. He looked desperate. "Dad, please, just sign the damn paper. We are trying to help you. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? The guys are waiting. I mean, Mr. Henderson is waiting." I looked at my son. The guys are waiting. He had slipped. He meant the sharks, the debt collectors. I looked at the pen in my hand. I looked at the X. They were forcing me. They were lying to me about the nature of the document. They were using my feigned disability against me. This was it. This was the coercion Patrick needed. This was the moment that would trigger the disinheritance clause. But I needed one more thing. I needed the signature. Not mine, the fake one. I let out a long sigh, letting my shoulders slump again. "I don't read so good anymore," I mumbled, returning to the character of the confused old man. "I guess you know best, Travis. You always were a smart boy." Travis let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. "Yeah, Dad, I am. I am doing this for us." I gripped the pen tighter. My hand shook violently, the nib scratching against the paper without ink for a second. "Okay," I said. "For the train ticket." I pressed the pen to the paper, but I didn't write Harlan Ford. I didn't write the name of the victim they thought they had conquered. I began to write a number. 1972. Brittany was watching the paper like a hawk, but from her angle, upside down, she couldn't see exactly what I was writing. She just saw ink hitting the page. She saw compliance. Finally, she whispered. I finished the sequence. 1972-Martha. I lifted the pen. "There," I said. Henderson grabbed the paper immediately. He didn't even check the signature. He just wanted to get out of there. He pulled out his notary seal from his pocket, slammed it down onto the paper with a heavy thud, and signed his own name next to mine. "Done," Henderson said, closing the folder and shoving it back into his briefcase. "Congratulations, Mrs. Ford. You now have full legal control over the estate." Brittany closed her eyes and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won the lottery by killing the ticket holder. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she said. "Travis, show him out." Travis walked Henderson to the door. I sat there at the table, staring at the grain of the wood. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. But then, the sound of gravel crunching under tires came from outside again. But this time, it wasn't a single car. It was two. And one of them had a siren that gave a short, sharp whoop whoop as it pulled up to the porch. Brittany's smile vanished. She looked at the window. "Who is that?" she demanded. I stood up. I buttoned my collar correctly. I straightened my back. I stopped shaking. "That," I said, my voice clear, strong, and devoid of any confusion, would be the actual cavalry. The front door opened. But it wasn't Travis coming back in. It was Sheriff Miller, a man I had known for 30 years, his hand resting on his belt. And behind him, carrying a briefcase that looked like a weapon, was Patrick O'Malley. Brittany looked from me to the sheriff, then back to me. Her face went pale. "What is going on?" she whispered. I walked over to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand was as steady as a rock. "I believe," I said, taking a sip, "that we are about to discuss the definition of fraud." The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line, trembling not because I was weak, but because I was holding back the urge to break it in half and drive it into the table. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the buzzing of a fly against the window pane and the shallow, ragged breathing of my son, Travis. He was standing by the sink, his back turned to me, unable to watch the crime he was helping to commit. But Brittany had no such qualms. She stood directly behind my chair, her hands gripping my shoulders. To an outsider, it might have looked like a comforting gesture, a daughter-in-law supporting an elder. But I could feel her nails digging into my flesh through the flannel shirt. She leaned down, her lips brushing against my ear, and whispered words that were meant only for me. "Sign it, Harlan, or so help me God, I will have the orderlies here within the hour." Her voice was low, a hiss of pure venom. "I know a place in Missoula," she continued, the sweetness completely gone from her tone. "It is a state facility. It smells like urine and boiled cabbage. The staff is overworked and underpaid, and they don't have time to deal with difficult old men. They will strap you to a bed, Harlan. They will sedate you until you don't know your own name. You will spend the rest of your miserable life staring at a peeling ceiling, wondering why you didn't just sign the paper. Is that what you want? Because that is the choice. The paper or the padded room. Choose." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear of the facility. I knew she couldn't legally put me there without a fight. It was the realization of how truly evil she was. She wasn't just greedy. She was sadistic. She enjoyed the power she held over me. She enjoyed seeing me cornered. I looked up at Travis one last time. I wanted him to turn around. I wanted him to stop her. I wanted him to be the man I raised. "Travis," I said softly. He flinched, his shoulders hunching up, but he didn't turn. He just gripped the edge of the sink tighter, his knuckles white. "Do it, Dad. he whispered, his voice cracking. Just do it. That was the final nail. My son had made his choice. Now I would make mine. I looked down at the document. Clause 4. Authority to dispose of real property. It was a death sentence for my legacy, but it was also the bait for the trap. Okay, I mumbled, letting my voice sound defeated and broken. I don't want to go to the hospital. I will sign. Brittany released the pressure on my shoulders, letting out a small, triumphant breath. Good choice, Dad. I pressed the nib of the fountain pen to the paper. The black ink bled slightly into the fiber. I started to write. But I didn't write Harlan Ford. I didn't write the name of the victim they thought they had conquered. I wrote a sequence that meant nothing to them, but everything to the law. 1, 9, 7, 2, dash, M, A, R, T, H, A. 1972. The year Martha and I bought the first acre of land. The year we started this life. It was the code Patrick O'Malley had set up in the trust protocols decades ago. A distress signal. A signature that, if it ever appeared on a legal document, automatically triggered the fraud protection clauses of the estate and stripped the beneficiary of all rights. I finished the last letter, adding a shaky flourish at the end to make it look like the scrawl of a senile man. There, I said, dropping the pen. It is done. Mr. Henderson, the notary, didn't even wait for the ink to dry. He snatched the document from under my hand with the speed of a starving dog grabbing a bone. He was sweating, his eyes darting toward the door as if he expected the walls to close in. He pulled out his official seal and stamped it hard next to my signature. Thump. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the room. Perfect, Henderson said, his voice trembling with relief. He didn't check the name. He didn't verify the spelling. He just saw ink on the line. He shoved the papers into his briefcase and snapped the locks shut. Congratulations, Mrs. Ford. You now have full power of attorney. The assets are yours to control. Brittany let out a laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated conquest. She walked around the table and looked at me, her eyes shining with manic energy. Finally, she said. She reached into the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of champagne she must have hidden there earlier. It was a bottle of Dom Pérignon. Another purchase made with my credit card. Another insult. She popped the cork. The loud pop made Travis jump. She grabbed 3 glasses from the cabinet, crystal glasses that belonged to Martha, and poured the bubbling golden liquid. To us, she announced, raising her glass. To the future, and to getting rid of the past. She looked at me when she said it. I was the past. She shoved a glass into Travis's hand. Drink up, babe. We are rich. We can list the ranch on Monday. I already have a developer interested. He wants to bulldoze the cabin and put in a luxury lodge. We are talking $2 million for the land alone. And once we liquidate the trust accounts, my God, Travis, we can buy the penthouse in Seattle. We can buy whatever we want. Travis took the glass, but his hand was shaking so badly that the champagne spilled over the rim and onto his shoes. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and terror. He drank the wine in one gulp, as if trying to drown his conscience. Brittany turned to the notary. Here you go, Mr. Henderson. A toast to a job well done. And don't worry about your fee. I will write you a check from the trust account as soon as we get access. You will get your bonus. Henderson grinned, showing yellowed teeth. He reached for the glass. I sat there, my hands folded on the table. I watched them celebrate. I watched them toast to the destruction of my life. I watched them divide up the spoils of a war they didn't even know they had lost. "You shouldn't drink that," I said quietly. Brittany paused, the glass halfway to her lips. She looked down at me with a sneer. "Excuse me?" "I said you shouldn't drink that," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "It is bad luck to toast with stolen money." Brittany laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, Harlan, you are still confused, aren't you? It isn't stolen. It is ours. You gave it to us. You signed, remember?" She tapped the briefcase. "It is legal. It is binding. And there is nothing you can do about it. You are just a guest in my house now. And if you don't like it, the offer for the state facility is still on the table." She tilted her head back to take a sip. And that was when the sound cut through the air. It started as a low wail in the distance, echoing off the canyon walls, but it grew louder with terrifying speed. It was a sound that every person in this country recognizes instantly. The sound of authority. The sound of judgment. The siren. Brittany froze. The glass remained at her lips, but she didn't drink. Her eyes darted to the window. Travis dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the crystal exploding into 1,000 shards, the expensive champagne pooling around his feet like blood. "What is that?" Travis whispered. Henderson grabbed his briefcase, his face turning the color of ash. "That is the police." "Why are the police here?" Brittany slammed her glass down on the counter. "Calm down," she hissed. "It is probably just a patrol. Maybe they saw the car speeding earlier. Just act normal. I have the paperwork. I am the legal guardian. I will handle this." But the siren didn't pass by. It got louder and louder. And then it cut off abruptly right in front of the cabin, replaced by the heavy crunch of tires on gravel and the slamming of car doors. I stood up. I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound was loud in the sudden silence of the room. "I don't think you can handle this, Brittany," I said. I walked past her. I walked past Travis, who was trembling like a leaf. I walked past the notary, who was clutching his briefcase to his chest like a shield. I walked to the front door and threw it open. There, standing on the porch, was Sheriff Miller. His hand was resting on his holster, his face grim. And beside him stood Patrick O'Malley, holding a thick file folder, looking like an angel of vengeance in a trench coat. Blue and red lights flashed from the cruiser behind them, washing the cabin in a chaotic, strobing glow. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "I believe we have some guests who have overstayed their welcome." Brittany rushed to the door, her face a mask of fake outrage. "Officer," she shouted, "thank God you are here. My father-in-law is having an episode. He is confused. We were just trying to calm him down." Patrick O'Malley stepped into the kitchen. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor. He looked at the terrified notary. And then he looked at Brittany. He didn't smile. "Mrs. Ford," he said, his voice deep and resonating with the weight of the law. "You can save the act. We received a digital alert from the trust monitoring system the moment a signature was attempted under duress. And I believe you have a document in that briefcase that belongs to the court." The room fell silent. The party was over. The hangover was about to begin. The red and blue lights from the cruiser pulsed through the open front door, cutting through the gloom of the cabin like a disco strobe in a graveyard. The silence that had held the room captive just seconds ago was shattered by the shrill, piercing voice of my daughter-in-law. Brittany did not freeze like a deer in headlights. She attacked. That was her nature. When cornered, she didn't beg, she bit. She marched right up to Sheriff Miller, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor, her finger pointed directly at the badge on his chest. "You have no right to be here," she screamed, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and panic. "This is private property. We are in the middle of a private family legal matter. Who called you? Was it the neighbors? Tell me who it was so I can sue them for harassment. Get out of my house immediately." Sheriff Miller didn't flinch. He was a man who had stared down grizzly bears and armed fugitives in these mountains. A screeching woman in a pink dress didn't intimidate him. He simply placed a large, calloused hand on his belt and looked past her, his eyes scanning the room. He looked at the shattered crystal on the floor. He looked at the puddle of expensive champagne. He looked at Travis, who was shaking so hard he had to lean against the counter to stay upright. And finally, he looked at the notary, Mr. Henderson, who was trying to inch his way toward the back door with his briefcase clutched to his chest. "Nobody called us, ma'am," the sheriff said, his voice calm and deep. "We were invited by the owner of the property." Brittany let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "The owner? You mean the senile old man sitting at the table? He doesn't know what day it is. He thinks I am his dead dog. He isn't competent to invite anyone anywhere. I have the paperwork right here that proves I am his legal guardian." She turned to Henderson, snapping her fingers. "Give me the file. Show him the power of attorney." But Henderson didn't move. He was staring at Patrick O'Malley. Patrick had stepped fully into the light of the kitchen. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but the way he carried himself made him look more dangerous than the sheriff. He walked over to the notary. He didn't ask for the briefcase. He just held out his hand. "Hand it over, Henderson," Patrick said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy. Henderson looked at Brittany, then at the sheriff, and finally at Patrick. He made the calculation of a coward. He handed the briefcase to Patrick. Brittany gasped. "What are you doing? That is my property. You can't just take that." Patrick placed the briefcase on the table, right next to my coffee cup. He popped the latches. He pulled out the blue folder that contained the document I had just signed. He opened it slowly, deliberately, letting the tension build until it was almost suffocating. He looked at the signature page. A small, cold smile touched his lips. He turned the document around and held it up for Brittany to see. "Is this the paperwork you are referring to, Mrs. Ford?" Patrick asked. "Yes," she snapped. "He signed it." "You saw him sign it, Henderson. Tell them." Patrick shook his head. "I see a signature here, but it doesn't say Harlan Ford." He tapped the line where the ink was still wet. "It says 1972 Martha," Patrick read aloud. Brittany froze. She squinted at the paper. Her face went slack. "What?" she whispered. "No. I saw him write. He was writing a distress code," Patrick interrupted, his voice turning hard as steel. "In the state of Montana, a signature on a legal document that is proven to be a prearranged distress signal is immediate proof of coercion. It renders the document not only void, but evidence of a crime." He slammed the folder shut. "And what you have done here today, attempting to force a senior citizen to sign over his assets under threat of institutionalization, is not a family matter. It is a third-degree felony. It is called exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And since you involved a notary to falsify the witness statement, we can add conspiracy to defraud to the list." The blood drained from Brittany's face so fast I thought she was going to faint. She staggered back, her hand finding the edge of the table for support. She looked at Travis. "Travis, do something," she hissed. Tell them your father is crazy. Tell them he begged us to do this." Travis didn't speak. He was staring at the floor, tears streaming down his face, his body convulsing with silent sobs. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. I decided it was time. I pushed my chair back. I didn't do it slowly. I didn't struggle. I stood up in one fluid motion, my spine straightening until I was standing at my full height of 6 feet. I rolled my shoulders back, shedding the hunch of the old man I had pretended to be. I buttoned the top button of my flannel shirt with steady fingers. I walked over to the counter, picked up a rag, and calmly wiped the spilled champagne from the floor near my boots. The room went deadly silent. Even Brittany stopped breathing. She stared at me as if I had just risen from the dead. I walked over to the sink and rinsed the rag. I turned off the tap. Then I turned to face them. My eyes were clear. My jaw was set. There was no confusion. There was no dementia. There was only the cold, hard clarity of a father who had been pushed too far. I looked at Brittany first. She shrank back under my gaze, realizing for the first time that she was not looking at a victim. She was looking at a predator. Then I looked at my son. "Travis," I said. My voice was not the raspy whisper they had gotten used to. It was the deep, resonant baritone that had read him bedtime stories and taught him how to shoot a rifle. "Look at me, son." Travis slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. When he saw me standing there, strong and lucid, a fresh wave of horror washed over his face. "Dad," he choked out. You were okay?" "I am better than okay, Travis," I said, taking a step toward him. "I am awake. I have been awake the whole time." I gestured to the kitchen, to the broken glass, to the notary cowering in the corner. "I heard you in the bathroom at the wedding, Travis. I heard you call me a senile old man. I heard you planning to sell the ranch to pay your gambling debts. I heard you tell your friends that you were going to dump me in a state home." Travis shook his head frantically. "No, Dad, I didn't mean it. It was just talk. I was scared." "I gave you a chance," I continued, my voice rising slightly, cutting off his excuses. "When I dropped that sugar yesterday, I was begging you to help me. When I asked you about the train ticket this morning, I was giving you an out. I wanted you to step in. I wanted you to say, 'Stop, that is my father. You can't do this to him.'" I pointed a finger at his chest. "But you didn't. You stood there and watched her threaten to lock me away in a padded room. You handed me the pen, Travis. You told me to sign my life away so you could buy another bottle of wine and pretend you were a big shot." Travis fell to his knees. He grabbed the hem of my shirt. "Dad, please. I am sorry. She made me." I pulled away from him. I didn't kick him, but the way I stepped back hurt him more than a physical blow. "She didn't make you do anything," I said coldly. "You are a grown man. You made a choice. You chose the woman who hates me over the father who raised you. You chose money over blood, and now you have to live with that choice." I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Miller," I said, "I would like to press charges. I want these people removed from my property. And I want a restraining order filed against both of them, effective immediately." Brittany found her voice again. "You can't do this. We are family. You can't send your own son to jail." I looked at her one last time. "I don't see a son," I said. "I see a trespasser. And in Montana, we don't take kindly to trespassers. Get them out of here." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off, before the dust settles and the screaming starts. Brittany stood frozen near the kitchen island, her face a mask of crumbling plaster. The arrogant sneer she had worn since the day I met her was gone, replaced by a hollow, gray look of total comprehension. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the leather briefcase on the table, as if it contained a venomous snake. Patrick O'Malley cleared his throat. The sound echoed off the log walls like a gavel striking a bench. He didn't look at Brittany or Travis. He looked down at the file in his hands, adjusting his glasses with a slow, deliberate movement that was terrifying in its calmness. "Before the sheriff escorts you off the premises," Patrick said, his voice level and professional, "there is one final piece of business we need to conclude. Since you were so eager to discuss the assets of the Harlan Ford estate, I think it is only fair that you understand exactly what those assets are. You see, Mrs. Ford, you were under the impression that you were fighting for control of a dilapidated cabin and a few acres of rocky soil. You thought you were scraping the bottom of the barrel." Patrick opened the file to a page marked with a red tab. He turned the document around and placed it on the table, smoothing it out with his palm. "This is the most recent appraisal of the Silver Creek Trust, dated 2 weeks ago," Patrick continued. "The asset list does not just include this cabin. It includes 5,000 acres of prime Montana wilderness. It includes the water rights to the creek that runs through the valley, which are currently leased to the State Agricultural Board. It includes the timber rights for the Northern Ridge. And, most importantly, it includes the mineral rights for the entire basin, which geologists have confirmed contains one of the largest deposits of rare earth elements in the region." Brittany's eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a step forward, involuntarily drawn to the paper. 5,000 acres, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Patrick nodded. The total valuation of the land, combined with the standing wind energy contracts and the liquid cash reserves currently held in the trust accounts, brings the total net worth of the estate to $45 million. $45 million. The number hung in the air. I saw the physical impact it had on them. Travis let out a sound that was like a whimper, his knees buckling slightly. Brittany stopped breathing. Her eyes darted back and forth, calculating, processing, realizing the magnitude of the mistake she had just made. She was a real estate agent. She knew what that kind of money meant. It meant private jets. It meant islands. It meant power. And she had held it in the palm of her hand. "But that is not all," Patrick said, turning the page. "There is another clause in the trust. It is what we call a conditional beneficiary clause, or as Harlan likes to call it, the bad boy clause." He looked up over the rim of his glasses, staring directly at Travis. "Clause 9, Section B," Patrick read aloud. "If any beneficiary attempts to seize control of the estate through coercion, fraud, duress, or by falsely declaring the primary trustee incompetent, said beneficiary shall be immediately and irrevocably removed from the trust. Their rights to inheritance shall be permanently severed, and they shall be treated as if they had predeceased the trustee." Patrick closed the folder with a sharp snap. "The moment you forced Harlan to sign that fraudulent power of attorney, and the moment you conspired with a notary to falsify a witness statement, you triggered this clause. It is self-executing, which means, as of 10 minutes ago, neither of you is entitled to a single penny. Not now, not when Harlan passes. Never. The $45 million is gone." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Brittany made a sound like a strangling cat. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching the pearls she wore. pearls she had likely bought with my stolen credit card. Her face turned a sickly shade of green. The blood left her head so fast she swayed on her feet. She reached out blindly for the counter, missed, and collapsed. It wasn't a graceful faint like in the movies. It was a heavy, ugly thud. She hit the floor hard, her legs tangling in the expensive fabric of her dress. She lay there, gasping for air, her eyes rolling back in her head, overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing weight of her own greed. She wasn't unconscious. She was just broken. Her mind couldn't handle the reality that she had been minutes away from an empire, only to lose it because she couldn't wait for a natural death. Travis didn't run to help her. He didn't even look at her. He looked at me. And then, he broke. The sobbing started deep in his chest, a pathetic, heaving sound. He threw himself across the room, sliding on his knees across the floorboards until he was at my feet. He reached out and grabbed my legs, burying his face in my work boots, the same boots he had made fun of just days ago. "Dad, no," he wailed, his voice thick with snot and tears. "Dad, please, you can't do this. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." He looked up at me, his face a mess of red blotches and desperation. "It was her, Dad." He pointed a shaking finger at Brittany, who was still moaning on the floor. "She made me do it. She told me you were sick. She said it was the only way to save the family. I was scared, Dad. I was just trying to be a good husband." "I didn't want to hurt you. I love you, Dad. You know I love you. Please, don't cut me out. Not like this." I looked down at my son. I looked at the man who had stood by while his wife threw my wife's picture in the trash. I looked at the man who had eaten steak while I ate watered-down soup. I looked at the man who was willing to lock me in a cage to pay his bookie. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a cold, empty pity. I didn't try to kick him away. I just stood there, solid as an oak tree, while he wept on my boots. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice quiet but cutting through his wails. "You didn't know that lying was wrong? You didn't know that stealing was a crime? You didn't know that your mother would be ashamed of you?" Travis sobbed harder, tightening his grip on my legs. "I was weak, Dad. I am sorry. I will divorce her. I will sign whatever you want. Just give me another chance. I can change. We can be a family again. Just you and me, like the old days." I reached down and peeled his fingers off my legs, one by one. His grip was strong, desperate, but I was stronger. I stepped back, creating a distance between us that felt wider than the Grand Canyon. "You are crying, Travis," I said. "But you are not crying because you are sorry. You are crying because you are poor." I gestured to the folder on the table. "If that folder said the ranch was worth nothing, you would still be standing there with the sheriff, letting them haul me away to the asylum. You wouldn't be hugging my boots. You would be stepping on them." Travis froze, his mouth hanging open, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "I loved you, son," I said, feeling a single tear track down my own cheek. "I loved you enough to give you everything. But you loved money more than you loved me. And now, you have neither." I looked at Sheriff Miller. "Sheriff, please remove these strangers from my house." Travis screamed. He screamed like a child being dragged away from a toy store. "No, Dad, no!" Sheriff Miller stepped forward, grabbing Travis by the arm and hauling him up. Another deputy had entered and was helping a staggering Brittany to her feet. She looked around the room, dazed, her eyes landing on me one last time. There was no hatred left in them, just emptiness. They were dragged out the door, their cries fading into the cool mountain air. The notary, Henderson, was handcuffed and led out behind them, his head hanging low. The door closed. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of a bomb. It was the silence of peace. I looked at Patrick. He took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. "That was the hardest thing I have ever watched," Patrick said softly. I walked over to the window and watched the patrol cars drive away, taking the toxicity out of my life forever. "It was necessary," I replied. "Sometimes you have to cut off a limb to save the body." I turned back to the empty kitchen. It was messy. The floor was sticky with champagne. The sugar was still spilled. But for the first time in a week, the air felt clean. "I have $45 million, Patrick," I said. "And I think I know exactly what I want to do with it." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I want to change the locks," I said. "And then, I want to buy a really good steak." Sheriff Miller stood by the door, his arms crossed, his presence filling the room like a granite boulder. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of spilled champagne and the sour scent of desperation. Travis was still sniffling, wiping his nose on his sleeve, but he didn't dare look at me. Brittany was leaning against the counter, her face pale, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. I looked at my watch. It was an old Timex, scratched and worn, the kind of watch Brittany had told me to throw away the day she arrived. "You have 10 minutes, I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a father scolding a child. It was the voice of a landlord evicting a bad tenant. 10 minutes to get your things and get off my land. If you are still here at minute 11, Sheriff Miller will arrest you for criminal trespassing. And considering the fraud you just attempted, I don't think you want to add another charge to the list." Travis looked up, his eyes wide with panic. 10 minutes? But Dad, we have so much stuff. We can't pack everything in 10 minutes. Then leave it, I said. I don't care. Burn it, bury it, just get it out of my house. Brittany pushed herself off the counter. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a frantic, clawing need to salvage whatever she could. She didn't argue. She realized the game was truly over. She grabbed Travis by the arm, her nails digging into his sweater. "Move!" she hissed at him. "Get the suitcases, now!" They scrambled. It was pathetic to watch. The arrogant power couple who had strutted into my home 5 days ago, treating me like a servant, were now running around like cockroaches when the lights come on. Travis ran to the guest room, throwing clothes haphazardly into the open Louis Vuitton bags. Brittany rushed to the bathroom, sweeping her expensive creams and lotions into a tote bag with a violent clatter. I stood in the hallway, watching them. I felt like a ghost haunting my own house. I watched the people who had tried to erase me, now frantically trying to erase themselves from my life. Brittany ran into the master bedroom, my bedroom. I followed her. She wasn't packing her clothes. She was standing by the heavy oak dresser, her hands fumbling with the small wooden jewelry box that sat on top. That box belonged to Martha. It wasn't full of diamonds. It held a silver locket, a pearl necklace I bought her when Travis was born, and her wedding ring. They weren't worth a fortune in money, but they were the only things I had left of her touch. I saw Brittany shove the pearl necklace into her pocket. She reached for the ring. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to move. "Put it back," a voice boomed from behind me. It was Sheriff Miller. He had followed us. He filled the doorway, his hand resting on his belt. Brittany froze, her hand hovering over the gold band. She turned slowly, trying to conjure up one last lie, one last manipulation. "I was just keeping it safe," she stammered. "I didn't want it to get lost in the chaos." "Empty your pockets," Miller said. He didn't ask. He ordered. Brittany glared at him, her lip trembling. For a second, I thought she would refuse. But then she looked at the handcuffs hanging from his belt. Slowly, with trembling hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the pearl necklace. She dropped it onto the dresser. It landed with a soft clatter next to the ring. "Everything," Miller said. She pulled out a silver brooch, then a pair of earrings. She had raided the box while I was distracted in the kitchen. She was stealing from a dead woman while being kicked out for stealing from a living man. "Get out," I said. The disgust in my voice was so thick I could taste it. She grabbed her tote bag and ran past me, not daring to make eye contact. "Time is up," I called out. Travis came stumbling out of the guest room, dragging 2 suitcases that were overflowing, sleeves of his designer shirts hanging out of the zippers. Brittany was struggling with 3 more bags. They looked ridiculous. They looked like refugees from a fashion show gone wrong. They dragged their luggage to the front door. The wheels bumped loudly over the threshold. Travis looked back at me one last time. He opened his mouth, maybe to say sorry, maybe to beg again. "Go," I said. He hung his head and walked out onto the porch. Brittany followed, struggling with the heavy bags, cursing under her breath. I walked to the doorway. Patrick O'Malley stood beside me. We watched them trudge down the porch steps and onto the gravel driveway. They headed toward where they had parked their Range Rover, the massive black SUV that had crushed my hydrangeas, the symbol of their status, the vehicle they planned to drive back to Seattle to start their new life of poverty. But when they rounded the corner of the cabin, they stopped dead. Travis dropped his suitcases. Brittany let out a scream that echoed off the canyon walls. "No! Where is it? Where is my car?" The driveway was empty. The tire tracks were there, the oil stains were there, but the Range Rover was gone. Brittany spun around, her face purple with rage. She looked up at the porch where I was standing. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "You stole my car! That is grand theft auto! Sheriff, arrest him!" Patrick O'Malley took a step forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He didn't hand it to her. He just held it up. "Actually, Mrs. Ford," Patrick called out, his voice calm and carrying easily across the yard. "That wasn't your car. According to the title search I ran this morning, that vehicle belongs to the leasing division of Seattle Premier Bank. And since you were 3 months behind on payments, and since I happened to notify the bank of the vehicle's location about an hour ago, well, let's just say their repossession team is very efficient." He smiled, a cold, lawyerly smile. "They picked it up while you were busy trying to steal the jewelry." Brittany stared at the empty spot where her car used to be. She looked at the suitcases. She looked at the long, winding dirt road that led to the highway. It was 5 miles to the nearest paved road. 5 miles of dust, rocks, and heat. Travis sank to his knees in the dirt. He put his head in his hands. "You can't leave us here!" Brittany screamed, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "How are we supposed to get to the city? We can't walk. I am wearing heels." I leaned against the door frame. I crossed my arms. "Walking is good for the heart," I said. "That is what you told me, isn't it? When you made me walk 5 miles to the store to buy groceries? You said the exercise would be good for my circulation." I pointed down the road. "Start walking. It is a long way to Seattle." Brittany looked at Travis. "Get up," she kicked him. "Get up, you idiot! Do something!" Travis stood up slowly. He didn't look at her. He picked up his bags. He didn't say a word. He just started walking. He started dragging the heavy suitcases down the driveway, the plastic wheels crunching loudly on the gravel. Brittany watched him go. She looked back at me. She looked at the house she had almost owned. She looked at the fortune she had lost. Then, with an incoherent shriek of rage, she grabbed her bags and ran after him, her heels sinking into the soft dirt, her ankles twisting with every step. I watched them go. I watched the dust rise around them. I watched the expensive Italian leather of their luggage getting scratched and ruined by the Montana earth. They looked small. They looked insignificant. They were just 2 specks of dust being blown away by the wind. I watched until they disappeared around the bend in the road. Patrick put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, Harlan?" he asked. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine. It smelled of sage. It didn't smell like perfume or lies anymore. "I am fine, Patrick," I said. I stepped back inside. Sheriff Miller tipped his hat and walked to his cruiser. Patrick followed him. I stood alone in the entryway. The house was quiet. But it wasn't the lonely silence that had haunted me for months. It was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a fortress that had held. It was the silence of a storm that had passed. I looked at the floor where the champagne had been spilled. I would have to scrub that later. I looked at the wall where the picture of Martha used to hang. I would have to buy a new frame. But I had the time, I had the money, and most importantly, I had my dignity. I reached out and grabbed the heavy oak door. I pushed it shut. The latch clicked. The sound was final. It was the sound of a book closing. I leaned my forehead against the wood and closed my eyes. Finally, I whispered to the empty room. Finally, I am home. 6 months have passed since the day the police lights faded from my driveway. The silence that I feared would swallow me up never came. Instead, my home is filled with a new kind of noise. It is the sound of life. I am sitting on my front porch, the same porch where my son once stood and looked at me with pity. But today, the air smells of fresh pancakes and bacon, not deception. I am holding a mug of coffee, steaming hot, and I am watching a group of kids running through the field where the hydrangeas are blooming again. They are laughing, chasing a golden retriever puppy that one of the veterans brought in last week. I didn't sell the ranch. I didn't let a developer bulldoze the memories Martha and I built. Instead, I opened the doors. Silver Creek is no longer just a cattle ranch. It is now the Martha Ford Sanctuary. We take in veterans who have nowhere else to go, men and women who served their country only to be forgotten by it. And we take in foster kids who have aged out of the system, giving them a place to learn a trade, to work the land, and to feel what it means to be part of a family that chooses you, not one that is forced on you. Patrick O'Malley comes by every Sunday for dinner. He tells me the legal updates, though I rarely ask. I know that Travis and Brittany are no longer together. The money was the glue that held them together, and when the money vanished, so did the marriage. Travis is back in Seattle. He is working as a dishwasher in a diner, not too different from the one where I met Patrick that night. He lives in a small studio apartment, and from what I hear, he is finally learning the value of a dollar earned through sweat rather than manipulation. As for Brittany, her ambition finally caught up with her. The investigation into her real estate dealings exposed a web of fraud that went back years. She is currently awaiting trial and looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. I don't wish them harm. I just don't wish them anything at all. They are ghosts to me now, lessons learned in the hardest way possible. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at the man sitting in the rocking chair next to me. His name is Jim. He lost his leg in Afghanistan and his house to a bank foreclosure. He is whittling a piece of cedar, teaching a 10-year-old boy how to carve a bird. Jim looked up at me and smiled. "Thanks for the coffee, Harlan," he said. "You are welcome, Jim," I replied. This is my wealth now. It isn't the $45 million sitting in the trust, which ensures that this sanctuary will run long after I am gone. My wealth is in the respect I see in Jim's eyes. It is in the laughter of those kids. It is in the peace of knowing that I am surrounded by people who are here because they want to be, not because they want something from me. I realized something profound in these last 6 months. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I spent years trying to buy my son's love, trying to be good enough for a daughter-in-law who saw me as an obstacle. I thought that because they were my flesh and blood, I owed them my dignity. I was wrong. Sometimes you have to cut off a limb to save the body. It is a painful choice. It goes against every instinct a parent has. You want to save them. You want to believe the best in them. But when the rot sets in, when the love is replaced by exploitation, you have to make a choice. You can let the infection kill you, or you can amputate the toxic part and learn to live again. I cut off the toxic tie to my son to save my own soul. And in doing so, I found a bigger family than I ever could have imagined. I found a purpose. So, if you are sitting there, feeling small in your own home, feeling used by the people who are supposed to protect you, listen to me. Do not let them trample you. Do not let them convince you that you are weak or confused or a burden. You have value. You have a voice. And you have the right to close the door on anyone who disrespects you, even if they share your last name. Because love without respect is just a transaction, and you are not a commodity. You are a human being. This is Harlan Ford, signing off from Silver Creek. The sun is shining, the coffee is hot, and for the first time in a long time, the future looks bright. The biggest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-preservation. We are often taught that family is everything, and that we must endure abuse for the sake of keeping the peace. But peace at the cost of your dignity is not peace. It is submission. True family will never ask you to destroy yourself to keep them happy. Trust your gut, protect your legacy, and never be afraid to stand alone if it means standing tall. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to make a tough choice to protect yourself from toxic family members, please hit that like button and share this video. It helps more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member? How did you find the strength? Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay strong and keep your head up.